Welcome to another segment of provocative conversations destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Hello. I want to continue on with this series of messages regarding the divine season. The divine season, again, the word divine meaning God-natured, the essence of who God is, what the term God represents, all that the term itself represents. The doings, the workings, the being of who God is, of God himself, whatever this term represents, because I would dare to say that even the term God, the word God, does not define God in his totality, does not give full weight or full meaning, does not express the fullness of God. But perhaps that's just the only word we can come up with right now, or that man has been able to come up with for the most part. I'm not sure. The word divine, meaning God orchestrated, God's workings, God's doings, the workings of God. Season, meaning a period in time, an appointed period in time, period of time where things occur, things happen, things that were set up beforehand to happen, happens. The divine season of the pandemic meaning something that is worldwide. It's not just local. It's not just within the community. It's not just within a state, not just within a country necessarily, but more so prevalent throughout. The divine season of the pandemic, the workings, the doings, the hand of God in the period of time in which we live, not just for you, not just for your household, not just for me, not just for my household, not just for our town, our city, not just our community, not just our county, not just our state, not just our country, but the workings, the hand of God in this divine season, in this divine period of time, in time. Not as though God's hand is not in all periods of time, in time, throughout time, but that the hand of God is definitely in this, because a lot of people would want to say that the pandemic has nothing to do with God, that this COVID thing has nothing to do with God, and we are to rebuke it, and we are to bind it and curse it and whatever else. And I've seen the very videos that you all have seen, where you have seen certain ministers, certain men, women of God, as though all of us aren't men, women of God. That's kind of twisted, just the term itself. Man of God, M-A-N, long D, man of God. What is that? And we're all mocking each other, woman of God. Come on. We're all men, women, boys, girls, children, babies of God. We're all the breathedness of God. Whatever God is, we are that. Well, someone may say, how can that be? How can you say that all that is, or all that we are, is God? Well, the essence of who we are, the being of who we are. We didn't become this on our own. We didn't become this because we shaped and formed ourselves. Now, there are aspects of us that truly, perhaps, at the least, or at, how would I say, at the least, they show forth the workings of God, the doings of God within and through us, even the most wretched things about us. I know that's a problem because people want to believe in this entity called a devil or a Satan or a demon or all of the above. I no longer buy into that. I don't believe in that one bit. And I know you say because my Bible says so. Your Bible tells you a lot of stuff that you don't believe, because oftentimes I'll point stuff out in scripture to people and they will not believe it. And these are the very people who will argue it tooth and nail till the end. They'll kill you over it. They won't die for it, but they'll kill you over it. And listen to that. They won't die for it, but they'll kill you over it. I am no longer willing to die for the Bible, but I am willing, as much as I am able to at this point in stage in my life as necessary, to die for the cause for which I came to this earth to accomplish, to walk out. I am willing to die for that. Does not mean that I'm willing to die for stupid. Does not mean that I'm willing to die for a Bible that has created nothing but constant war and hardship for so many people. Again, I'll keep going to it because it is a truth that is believed and practiced. Slaves, obey your masters. So God opens up a door of opportunity for you to be free from your enslavement. God uses a divine type of Harriet Tubman, and then you come to me with that verse: slaves, obey your masters, and don't you dare seek to be loose. In fact, pray for the ones who are beating you down on the head, and pray for this and pray for that and pray for this and pray for that. But let me tell you, these very people who are telling you to pray for these people. Now, I'm going to say this here. It is definitely healthy to pray. I don't like the word pray because we have such a twisted view on the word pray, and I'm not into that. That doesn't, just because I'm saying this, I'm moving around already, but that doesn't mean that I'm saying that prayer is wrong. Our terminology, our definition of prayer are different, apparently. Because our terminologies are different, or our term, the way that you define or others may define prayer versus how I define prayer, they're different. And because they're different, I see in the way that I define prayer, I'm not about all of this quoting to God everything that God already knows, quoting to God his words, like you're going to tie God down to whatever it is you want him to do. I'm not into any of that. I don't understand any of that. I swore to it at one time, but I no longer swear to that at all. Not at all. My term, the way that I use prayer is more like flowing in conversation with God on a quiet tip. Flowing with conversation with God on a quiet tip. I believe that prayer is more of God talking to you, or the essence of your being in conversation with yourself. the essence of God intertwined with the very being, with the very essence of you communing. What I'm talking regarding this pandemic period, this pandemic season, which is going to be a very, very long season, I'm talking from what I believe that God spoke to me. In saying that, I'm only able to say it in the terms that I am not just referring to, but that I am capable at this point in time to articulate. But what I believe is going to happen is that many of us, or some of us, a certain of us, I do believe I'm in this here. Not that I'm saying that you aren't. I'm just saying I do believe that I'm in this, and it's up to you to believe whether or not you're in this. We're going to come to a point where we're going to realize that we will most likely realize, this is me talking, that we will most likely realize that the very voice of God is actually the voice of us. Now, that really scratches up and mixes up a whole lot of junk right there, I know, because now it's like, okay, well, there's so many people out there who say, God, 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 you're right. And then there's so many people out there who saying, God, 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 and you're right. And these are two different groups. You have one group that's talking out of their head. That group is talking out of their denominational affiliations and belief structures and systems. You have them also talking out of their subconscious and their conscious thoughts and perceptions, the content. They're talking from the content of the movies and the dealings and the craziness and relationships that they had with people of their past or even of their present that is bleeding in, and they turn that as God. And then you have those who truly are hearing from the deepness of their being, from the deepness of their soul, not their soulishness that is depraved, that soulish part of us that is our humanity, more of our humanity than our divinity, that part of us that has not connected with the God, with the godness of ourselves, the godness of our essence. I know that I'm talking probably deeper than you desire to hear at this point, but I have to say this. I feel there are those who hear from God or hear from the depths of their being. Now, if the Bible is true, where Jesus said, God, you in me, I in you, and we in them. If God, if this Christedness, this Christ concept, this Jesus concept is truly one with us and truly dwells in us and works through us, then he's not some being, he's not some Godhead that is outside of us as much as he is right within us. And because he's not physical necessarily, he's not tangible, such as this desk that I'm sitting at or this microphone that I'm talking on. Because he's not of tangible substance, yet he resides within us. He must make up the very essence, the very nature, the very fiber or the very fibers of who we are. And if he is the very essence, the very fibers, the very nature, the very breathedness, the very nephesh of who we are, then he must be so one with us that when we talk, he's talking. When he talks, we talk from that which he talks. I know that doesn't sound proper, but how would I say it? It doesn't sound proper. It sounds almost, what would we call it? We would call this heresy. Heresy talking, heresy conversations. People would be afraid of the type stuff that I'm saying right now. And I suppose that's what causes me to be seen as a heretic. But I am proud to be that, in the sense that I am proud to say that I do not adhere to the teachings of most religion. I don't want to say religions. I'll say most religion. Doesn't sound right grammatically, but I do not adhere to the status quo of religion or churchology. So if I'm considered a heretic, I'm proud to be that. You won't come into these conversations with others until you come into these conversations with and within yourself. How much of your breath, I'll say this here, the very essence of God is the very essence of who you are. Now, if that is untrue, how do you separate the breath of God from the breath of you? How do you separate the life of God, who is the life or the giver of life? He is the life source of the world. How do you separate the lifedness of God from the lifedness of you? How do you separate the likeness of God from the likeness of you if you've never seen the likeness of God as you have seen the likeness of you? In fact, perhaps if we would just see the likeness of ourselves as it relates to God, we would see the likeness of God in relation to us. I'm just playing around and flipping it, but same thing, messing a little bit. The lifedness of God is the lifedness of you. And if you came to understand more of the likedness of God, or the lifedness, I know that's not a word, the lifedness of God, if you come to understand that more deeply and more clearly, you will come to not only understand yourself, not only come to know yourself, but you will come to like yourself. You will come to love yourself more than you do. In fact, if you came to love yourself more than you do, you would do more to protect yourself from everything that is not like God. Now, I will go further into saying, because I separated two different groups, the one group that hears from God and who says, well, both groups say that they hear from God, but then both groups are not coming from the same fountain of God. Some are coming from the fountainess or the fountain of the fountains of their own, yet even that is of God. And then you have those who are coming from the fountains within the depths of their soul, within the wells within their being, the reservoirs within their being, the very place where God emanates, the totality of God emanates from within. Yet at the same time, they all work together. Even when it is stated, I am wondering if God, there are verses in scripture that speaks about how God sends a lion spirit, that people would believe it. Some may say to me, well, that's what I feel you are. You're a lion spirit, or God sent you a lion spirit and you believed it and you're teaching it. Well, it is what it is. The Bible says, let every man be convinced in his own mind. Now, if that is a true statement, let every man be convinced or convicted in his own mind. Well, I have to be convinced, because I definitely am convicted that what I heard is from God. And I know that the source that I hear from, I cannot conjure this up on my own, and I could not be as exact as you will hear what I'm saying I heard. So I have to believe that this came from a true source, an actual source, and not a lying source of a divine sentness. let me give some clarity there. I have to believe that what I heard, I am convinced at this point that what I heard is from a divine and from the divine. Now, I have to believe also that what some other people have heard is from the divine as well, even if what they're saying is opposite of what I'm saying I heard. Why? Well, if indeed the Bible is correct that God sent a lying spirit that they would believe the lie, then that would say that there are divine spirits or spirits of lies on divine missions throughout the universe at particular moments, times, periods, for specific situations or circumstances. I'm not sure how that works. All I know is that it says that the divine sent a lying spirit. So maybe in order for the yin and the yang to work together, the positive and the negative to work together, is that the divine sends one thing and then the divine has another sent thing. I am not sure, but I am not afraid to talk these things out loud as I deal with them internally. See, a lot of people have a lot of arguments about scripture and truth and whatever, or supposed truth and whatever, but they're too afraid to test it. I have no problem in pouring acid on a jewel if I know that that jewel is genuine. The only time that I would have a problem with pouring acid on that chain, that supposed gold chain, is if I feel that there may be some fakeness within it. But if there's no fakeness within it, no impurities mixed within it, then I am not afraid to acid test. I'm not afraid to acid test the things that I say out loud. The things that, in fact, the reason why I say them out loud is because I more than likely have acid tested them, or something popped up that I never intellectually registered, and I began to talk it out loud. And then many times I'll say, you know what? I never gave that thought. I'm going to play with that thought. I want to leave that thought alone right now, because that's a new thought to me. That wasn't a thought through thought, but that's a new thought that was just birthed in my intellect, or in the realm of my intellect. I want to give that some greater thought. Anyhow, however you believe is how you must believe, and however I believe, I must believe. Now, that's not a good statement to make, because now it's believe whatever you want to believe, and then I believe whatever I want to believe. I don't believe we necessarily have the choice to believe whatever it is we want to believe. I don't believe it works like that. In fact, apparently it doesn't work like that, because again, your Bible says he sent lying spirits, or a lying spirit, that they would believe the lie, so that they would believe the lie, so that they would be convinced, so that they would be swayed in a direction that apparently they would have never have gone. Why? Because if they were going to go in the direction that he wanted them to go, he would have never had to send a spirit. They would just do it on their own choosing. But the fact that he had to send a spirit, supposed lying spirit, in order for them to go in the direction that he needed them to go, seems to imply that had he not have sent that spirit, that divine spirit, that divine leading, they would have never done it on their own so-called free volition or their free will. Yeah. So what am I saying? Perhaps my terminology of hearing from God may not settle with you. And I understand that because it doesn't fully settle with me. But what I cannot do is I cannot deny this voice, because this voice within me, this voice that speaks to me, I know that this voice is correct. And this voice has unveiled probably 90, if not greater percent of what I speak. This inner voice that I hear so clearly and so vividly for hours at a time, not bragging, not boasting. I'm just making a statement. I cannot sit this long and miss God or miss the essence of my being, the essence of my breath that long. I cannot. And my life and events in my life have proven that I must hear, because there is no way that I could hear or know the things that I have come to know without apparently hearing, especially when I don't listen to preachers, especially when I don't tune in to stuff like TBN or PTL or any of this stuff any longer. I'm far displaced from it. I'm not in anyone's synagogue, anyone's church, anyone's mosque, anyone's Buddhist temple or whatever. I'm not into any of that. I'm not in any of it. Not shooting any of it down. If I shoot anything down, it's the side of Christianity. It's the side of the church, but not on the side of Buddhists and Hindus and all of those others. Those people are in their quest. And many Christians, or so-called Christians, church folk, they're in their quest as well. Many are not in a quest. They're in a cult, not a quest. They're in a quote. They're an occult. All right. They're in an occult. But anyway, I have to term this what I heard from God. Okay. All right. All I'm doing is laying down foundations, and trust me, when I begin to read this stuff, you will begin to see that it's not that I didn't have substance, but I had to work up to the substance. Am I trying to convince you? Well, I would like for you to be convinced on the part that you are convicted of. But God told me, there I go again. God told me, and you're going to keep hearing me say that because I don't know any other way to put it. You know, it's not me. It's not me. It's not me. Don't get me wrong. When God is talking to you, you can, it is not hard to hear outside of God in those moments. But then there are those moments that you are the least secure person at that moment, and in those moments that God is talking. And yet you will come to find out that that was the most pure hearing that you have heard in recent or any of your past up to that point. In other words, how the Bible says, when I'm weak, I'm strong. In my messiness, his grace becomes that sufficient supply of whatever it is I'm lacking in. His grace is sufficient in my weakness. It's like when I feel the least secure about what I'm hearing is when it's the greatest purity of what I've heard. You won't understand that until you begin to hear. Yet at the same time, sometimes you can become I believe you can be so confident in yourself that you'll begin to hear yourself more so than you hear God. But even in that, I think there are lessons in that. And I think that God actually is working in and through that as well for reasons beyond us, for reasons that helps to bring us into a whole state or more whole state, a more mature state in him, to have a sharper keenness in our hearing. There's something divine even in the missings of it all. But again, we are all living out our humanity at the same time, trying to combine all of it intellectually with our divinity. I know that's just like, wow, but we'll leave it right there for now because I'm jumping and hopping. So I left off with talking about this shift that is occurring, this change that is occurring. I said, God never used the terminology shift with me ever before until leading up to this pandemic period that I had no idea of. So God was talking to me about a shift, and then he began to talk to me about a flow, a shift and a flow, a shift and a flow. I'm not knowing what God is talking about, but I don't wait to understand it in order to record it. I record it. When I say record it, I mean digitally record it, meaning type into a computer. I put it into a computer. I don't write out what God tells me. It would take me forever. Then I wouldn't be able to read half of my words because my writing has never been the greatest. I love to see good writing, but I'm just not one of those who can write good. And because I've been typing now since 1991, perhaps 91, I started somewhere around in 1991 in college, started typing the first computers the first computers that I ever worked on in the very early 90s. I've only written several times in the early 90s or the mid 90s, but I've been because once I left college, I had no computer. But once I got a computer and then I became confident enough to use that computer, which took about 6 months after purchasing the computer, I sat that computer on a desk in Germany and never touched that computer for almost 6 months because I was afraid to cut it on. Then I was thinking that people would see my stuff and steal my stuff. I was thinking that you could just see right through the internet, and then we didn't even have internet in Germany at the time. But anyway, once I got my own computer and became confident enough, I began to type, and I've not written since that time period. So digitally, when I say record, I digitally input through my laptop or through my desktop into digital form, which is more, in one sense, it's more secure, and I could make copies very easy than trying to run everything off and having books everywhere like I have them now. But anyway, not everywhere, but in a lot of places that if I would just get rid of the books of the writings, I would have more space to do other things. And eventually, I guess I will. So as I began to type, this one here is March 13th. One night on March 13th of this year, 2020, God said to me, there's a shift occurring. There's a shift that is ongoing, an ongoing shift, not knowing what he's talking about. There's a shift that is going to lead you away from the traditional views of the church. A shift that is going to lead you away from the traditional views of the church. Something that is traditional is something that has been practiced for, could be years, could be decades, could be centuries. A shift that is going to lead you away from the traditional views of the church. Well, I already knew that God was leading me away from the church, so I'm thinking God is talking to me. I already understood that God gave me a Jeremiah type approach to ministry. I already knew that. I knew that since the early 90s. And then when I look back in my life, I could see where God was using me in that manner throughout my life, even in my wildhood, my street hood, because I was always going against. There is a shift that is going to lead you away from the traditional views of the church. You are going to be led away from the church. I'm going to be led away from the church. Well, at this point, 2020, the year that we're in, I had already been away from the church since 2007. So now you're telling me something that I already knew. To what degree I knew it is different, but I knew that you led me away from the church. But again, you don't question when you're trying to hear, and when you're flowing in a hearing moment, you just type it. Don't try to make sense out of it. Just put it down. You'll work with it later. Put it down now as you're hearing it. So I'm hearing it. And it's telling me this shift is going to lead you away from the church, and the current of the shift is going to pull you away from the church. And I'm like, okay, I'm just writing. Now, the current of the shift is pulling you away from the church. Okay. So God is saying to me, there's a shift that is going on. That shift is current, meaning right now. That shift is happening right now. It's not something that's going to happen. It's something that is happening right now. So there's a current shift. But then God is also saying to me, there is a current within the shift. A current. There's a flow. There's a movement within the shift that is pulling you in a particular direction. In this case, God said the current shift, the current within the shift is pulling you away from the church. Now understand this here. God was telling me this, but God was not just telling me this for me as I thought. God is speaking to the world, and you will come to know this greater as I move on, and you will come to know this in your personal life as you see all of the events occur, and as you put these events that have already occurred together in a working sense. The current within the shift, the current of this current shift that we are in is pulling us away from the church. You will not be pulled toward the church. Oh my goodness. But you will be pulled away from the church. God, are you telling me that where you're taking me, where you're taking this world, where you're taking this current generation of people, not necessarily a certain age group of people, but this current living generation of people, those who are here right now and who are to go through the shift, who, if you're going to be here and you're going to be on this earth beyond this period, this season in time, you are going to be pulled in a direction that is not going to be consistent with your past. It's not going to be consistent with what you have come to know, that you have become accustomed to. The current that is within this shift, the flow, the direction of this shift, which is the direction of the current within the shift, the direction of the current shift that is occurring. You will not be pulled toward church. You will not be pulled toward the religion of man, the traditions of man. You will be pulled away from the church, which is why we see the church bucking and going crazy right now and saying we're being attacked. We're being robbed. We're the victims of, but I won't get ahead of myself. You will want to hear what I have to say. You will not have heard this message in this way from anyone. Trust me. Now, there are some that God has given it to, but they'll have their twist on it, but it'll be along the same lines more than likely. You don't look for many. The Bible says, understand, I'm only using the principle, okay? Not the wordings, the principle. Many, wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many will follow, and narrow is the gate that leads into, and there'll be few that follow. I'm only using the principle. The principle is, just because there are many other people speaking something opposite of what you hear me speaking does not mean that their route is the actual route. In fact, it says, if there are a greater number going in that direction, perhaps that just proves that is the wrong direction, or rather, I should say that is not the proper direction that God is moving in this situation. And if there are fewer, which I believe there are fewer people speaking the genuineness of than there are of those who are speaking otherwise. I believe there are fewer of us out here speaking along these terms. It's out there. Go and look. Go and check it out. Go and you get messed up trying to weave through all of that mess. Okay, but anyway, it is what it is. There's some divinity in that as well, because if all things work together, somehow that stuff works together. I don't have time to prove that or argue that in a good sense at this point in time. But anyway, you will not be pulled toward the church, but that you will be pulled away from the church. Do not expect this shift to pull you into the church. Wait a minute. The direction that you're bringing things, the direction that this shift is going, you're telling me that it's not going to pull the people into the church? But I thought that the church is saying there's going to be this great revival and there's going to be this great winning of souls. What souls? What need for souls? What are you talking about? Sounds like a bunch of religious businessmen hoping that we'll get an inflow of people, because it's not necessarily the people we want, but it's the income and the tithes and offerings that the people will bring. Because as a good businessman, you kind of count your ducks before they hatch. So you say, if we can get another 100 souls or another 100 bodies, working bodies who have good income, then we can increase our revenue. But anyway, let's keep going. Do not expect the shift to pull you into the church. The shift is not in the direction of the church. Oh my goodness. God, the direction that you're moving is not in the direction of the church. Oh my goodness. The church is not in the shift. This is what messed me up. God, did you just tell me that the church is not in the current shift? That the church is not flowing with the current shift? That the current within this current shift is not inclusive of the church? The church is not in the shift. The church is not in the shifting that is occurring. The church is not in the shifting that is occurring. Oh my goodness. I'm not understanding what God is saying back on March 13th. Now understand, later on this week, on March 17th or the 18th, it all clicked what God was talking about as I was sitting down talking to 3 of my family members. It was like it was an epiphany moment where all 3 of us realized it, maybe 2 hours or an hour, maybe 2 hours in 3 hours inside of me trying to tell them what God has been saying to me over the months. And I was reading this particular one to them that I'm reading now, that it just clicked. Oh my goodness, God, you're talking about what we're going through right now. And I just told my family, I said, you know what? I want to stop right now. I don't want to go any further. I want to hear from God. I want to hear what God is saying to me, because I'm seeing some things and everybody was like in a moment of like, uh-oh. Because something started clicking within each of us. But anyway, God said the church is not in this shift. The church is not in the shifting that is occurring. The church is moving. The shift is moving away from the church. The shift is moving away from the church. The shift is against the direction of the church. The God movement, the current divine season of the pandemic, is moving away from the church, is moving against the direction of the church. God is not pulling us into the church house and pull it into the church system the religious system. God is pulling us away from the religious system. He's pulling us away from the church. He's pulling us away from the founders of all of these things. Oh my goodness. The shift is occurring, and the church does not even realize it. God said the shift is occurring, and the church does not even realize it. One thing about this shifting, if you don't sense it, if you don't feel it, if you're not submitted to God, if you're not committed to yourself, to principle, you can miss what is occurring. Does not mean that you won't be pulled along by the times, but it does mean that you will be, even though you will be pulled along by the times and by the shifting of the current, you will do so while kicking and screaming and hollering like a little child inside of a candy store whose mommy said, no, you can't have any candy today, son or daughter. And they go to screaming and having a hissy on the floor and kicking and whatever. Still, no matter how much they kick and hiss, they're still not going to get candy. And then the mama's going to probably pull them by the toe and pull them right outside the door as she's exiting that store. But the child still doesn't get what he wants. I believe that a lot of people are kicking and screaming throughout the process. But even though they're kicking and screaming, it doesn't change the fact. So right now you hear a lot of people, especially the church, kicking and screaming about the flow of this season, about the flow of this pandemic season, about having to wear a mask, about having to put on gloves, about having to use sanitizers, about having to shut up in their homes and get out of the bars and get from the drinking table and get from the partying table and get from the hoeing houses and all. It's messing them up. The church is upset. The church is real bothered about this here. Perhaps the church is so upset because these preachers can't get to their mistresses. These mistresses can't get to their preachers. And then they don't have an excuse for why they're out there at the hotels and on the highways and flying here and there. Why? Because church is not open. So they can't lie to their spouse and saying, well, and say something to the effect of, well, I got to go on the road. I got this seminar. I got this revival to do in Louisiana or wherever. And by them not having a place to justify why they're in that hotel, why they're in there with those women, those men, women with men, men with women, men with men, women with women, however it is, whatever their flavor is, they don't have a cover up now. This pandemic season messed up a lot of stuff. It stopped a lot of stuff from being able to occur. Now check this out. God said, do not expect the shift to pull you into the church. The shift is not in the direction of the church. The church is not in the shift. The church is not in the shifting that is occurring. The shift is moving away from the church. The shift is against the direction of the church. I have a lot to say about the church, you all, not in this setting, but as we continue to move forward in these recordings of the divine season of the pandemic, you will see what I'm saying then. The shift is occurring and the church does not even realize it. And we know that the church doesn't realize it. That's why you have so many people in the church dying from the pandemic, so many bishops who have died, so many pastors who have died. Why? Because they didn't even realize the divineness or the divine workings, the workings of the divine within this pandemic. The church is not aware of the shift. The church is oblivious to the shift. The shifting that is occurring is within individuals. God said the shifting that is occurring is within individuals. It's not so much of an atmosphere, though it is, it's inclusive of, but it is a shifting that is occurring within people within us. The shifting is occurring within the souls of the people, within the souls of the people. The church cannot control this shift. The church cannot dictate this shift. That's a problem with the church, because if the church cannot control this shift, the church cannot dictate the route that this shift takes, which is why the church is so messed up. In fact, because the shift is within you, because things are being shut down and have been shut down, the church cannot control you because the shift is within you. And the church realizes that it is losing control of you, in that it does not have control of the shift, which is in you. The church cannot dictate to the shift. That's why the church cannot dictate to you unless you are within the parameters of the church structure, within the parameters of the church house, within proximity of the church. So the church is losing its dictatorship over its members. If the church loses its dictatorship over its members, then the church loses its influence, and it loses its position. It loses its financial flow. The church has no influence against the shift. That's what God told me. The church has no influence against the shift. The church cannot influence the direction of the shift. It can't influence life, the economy, the political system to go against the shift, the direction that God is taking us, the divine direction of the shift, the divine season of the pandemic. The shift that is occurring is greater than the church, and that truly messes up the church when the church feels that it is the greatest. This shift is greater than what the church is able to produce. This church would have never been able to produce this shift. This shifting that is occurring is so beyond the church. The church never had the ability and will never have the ability to produce a shift as what is occurring right now. That's how we know that the church is not dictating this shift, because the church was caught off guard just like everyone else was. The church had no idea. That's not to say that certain individuals within the church structure did not sense some things or hear some things. Whether or not they put them together intellectually, I'm not sure, because I was hearing things, but I was not putting them together. There was just not enough pieces to the puzzle to even figure it out. It wasn't like God gave me the edges of the puzzle or gave me a design, a picture of the puzzle in its completed form, and then he said, okay, now put the pieces together. No, he gave me no full picture of anything. He didn't even give me edges when he gave me, when you building a puzzle, you like the edges because you can always get those flat edges, and what, this goes along the edge of somewhere. So you try to find all the edges and put the edges together, and then you work inside, whatever. But the inside pieces are generally the hardest pieces because, they just don't make sense. It just on face value, it's like, how does this fit? And you try to push things together. I had nothing to put together. And perhaps that's how it was with a lot of people. We had pieces, but we didn't know what those pieces truly included. At least I didn't. I'll put it that way. I didn't. And the church didn't know it either, because the church didn't produce this. The shift is not and cannot be manufactured by the church. Well, that's a problem for the church, because the church was not able to manufacture what God is doing in this season. That's a mess up factor right there alone. The church cannot stand in the way of the shifting that is occurring. And those who are not moving in the direction of the shifting will be left to wonder and left to wander. God said the church cannot stand in the way of the shifting that is occurring. Right now, we are seeing the church do just that. The church is using politics. The church is using everything that they can in their arsenal to mess us up. They're trying to use their microphone. They're trying to use their voices to sway us, to persuade us to go in a direction that the shift is not taking. if you want to know the direction of God, go the opposite direction of the church as a whole. Now, there are certain individuals and certain groups within the church structure, the church system, who are going in a different direction than what the general church is going. But the powers that be within the church head of this so-called goddom, Christendom, Christdom, you don't want to follow that. You will know the direction of God by looking at the direction of the church as a whole. If the direction of the church is going toward the expanding of the church, the consistency of what has always been within the church, if they're still pushing towards that agenda, if they're still pushing towards white supremacy, or the black churches still pushing towards greed and wealth and all of this so-called prosperity, I don't have a problem against prosperity, not even the message of prosperity. I think it does begin in the mind, and it has to be taught. Yet at the same time, we got to be, there's a balance there. And I don't believe that the balance is equal. I believe the greed and the pride and the love for money in the world, things in the world are what's driving prosperity, or all of these messages regarding prosperity. But I do not shoot the essence of the teaching. I don't shoot that as though that's sinful. I don't believe that it is sinful. But those who are not moving in the direction of the shifting will be left to wonder, and left to wander. What that's saying there is that those who do not move intently, we're going to move regardless of whether we agree with it or not. We'll just be kicking, fussing, cussing, and hollering all the way through the process. But we're going to go because the shift is taking us. This is the direction that the shift is taking us, that the divine nature, the divine will and purpose and plans of God is taking us. But if you are not submitted or committed to the direction of this shift that is occurring, you're going to be left to wonder. What will you be wondering? I wonder what just happened. I wonder what just took place. I wonder where I would have been had I been submitted and committed to this change, to this shifting, to the flow of where God has now taken us. I wonder where I would have been. And then he said, they'll be left to wonder and left to wander. So one is WONDER and the other is WANDER. And I know that right now I should be somewhere close to my hour, but I'm just going to go just a few seconds over, a few minutes over. I try to keep it at an hour, and I'll go into the next one. They'll be left to wonder. They'll be left to wander. Wander. Well, why would the people be wandering? Well, they'll be wandering because they'll be moving around aimlessly. They'll be going at things that are dead ends. They'll be running after dead dogs. They'll be running into cul-de-sacs into their life. You know, a cul-de-sac is when you go on a street and there's no more outlet. There's no outlet of that street. That street does not lead you into another street that will bring you into another direction, northeast, south, or west. That street, it doesn't necessarily come to a dead end, but it comes into a cul-de-sac. And at the end of that street, it becomes a loop around. It's just a circle, and you come right back around and have to go right back out in the direction that you came in. Well, that's a cul-de-sac. Well, spiritually, you will be in a cul-de-sac if you don't go intently, consciously, and submittedly into the direction of the shift that is occurring right now. You will be left to wander throughout your life beyond this period that we're in, beyond this season. You will be left to wander. You will wander within this period, wandering around. You're just wandering aimlessly. You have no goal. Nothing is working for you. Every avenue you go is a dead end, either a dead end or a cul-de-sac. You just keep going around in a circle, almost like the children of Israel in the desert. They were just wandering, never went anywhere, never went beyond the borders of the wilderness, just wandering until their deaths. Only a few people decided to go with the flow, and they ended up in the promise. That's how it's going to be now. If you don't get into the direction of this flow that is occurring right now, you're going to be left to wonder, and you're going to be left to wander, and you'll be trying to go back to all the things that you left, and none of it is working. And you would just be wandering, trying to find a path back to your past that can never be. Almost like the children of Israel. I wish that we were back in Egypt, because when we were in Egypt, we had this and this and that and that. Yeah, but you forgot you had chains on your neck. You were being hard pressed for 400 years. The Bible said you was crying out to God, and then he finally heard you. And now you're saying, I want to go back to what I just left out of. I want to go back into the dispensational period that I left out of. What is you talking about? So they will be left in their amazement at what is happening. Those who do not go and submit and commit to the directional flow of this current state that we're in, this current season that we're in, this pandemic period and the requirements of it that we're in, they will be left in their amazement. You will be left in your amazement at what is happening. You will be amazed at all of the changes that are going to occur in this period of shifting that we are in. You will wake up and you will not recognize anything. Your eyes will open spiritually, and you would, if your eyes open, your eyes will open spiritually, and you will begin to see things as you have never seen them before. There will be a divine opening of eyes and ears, and you will begin to see and hear what you never heard before. But now it's all strange. Now you're amazed at what has occurred, and you missed all of it. Now you're wondering, how did that happen? How did I miss that? Why didn't I hear that? Now you're left to wander. You're wandering. What direction do I go now? How do I fix this now? How do I convert now? It's just like people who didn't want to go with technology, and they wanted to stay with typewriters or pen and paper. And now we're people who wanted to go, they wanted paper checks. They didn't want checks deposited into their accounts. They wanted paper checks. They didn't want debit cards. They wanted to remain with writing checks, physical paper. They wanted to write their deposits and their withdrawals. They didn't want to do it digitally through a telemachine. We didn't want to pay our bills physically, but they forced us to begin to pay our bills online. They forced us to open up a checking account. They forced us to get a debit card. They forced us to buy a computer. We didn't want to. And because we didn't take that time as the transition was occurring to learn technology, to accept and go along with the flow, the shifting of technology, we were left in the end, because we're going to be forced to go in the direction that God is taking us anyway. We're going to be left in the end wondering, now how in the hell do I make this computer cut on? How in the hell do I go onto this internet and find a site, a website? How do I make this happen? What do you mean a password? What kind of password? What is it? I don't understand this here. And then we're left to wander, because now we're on the internet wandering like, where do I go now? Where do I, this is so big. This is so vast. This is so technical. And you're just wandering, WANDER, wandering. They will be left in amazement. So many people who did not go with the flow of technology are now left in amazement at what technology is capable of doing. They don't understand it. They're still wondering and wandering. And at the same time, they're amazed. I am just amazed at the changes. I am just amazed at the shifting that has occurred. That's what they're saying. Well, that's what a lot of people are saying right now, and what a lot of people will be saying, perhaps most likely than not, they will be saying for the rest of their earthly lives, those who did not commit and submit to the change and who were going against the direction of the flow. Not so much that they could stop the direction of the flow, but in their mind, in their thinking, in their attitude, in their behavior patterns, they were going in a direction that was opposite of the flow. Those people were left to wander, and be in utter amazement when all of this happens. As I'm wrapping it up, the church will be left to figure what just occurred. They will be left to try to figure out what just occurred. They, the church, will be taken in amazement at what is occurring right before them. And the church has not necessarily come to that point right now. Some have. They're amazed at how things shifted overnight. Those are the ones who are in the heartbeat of God. Those people, they may not understand, but their hearts are correct, and they're seeing and they're sensing, and they're coming to realize and even accept what is occurring, and they're amazed. But then there are others who won't see this until later, and they will see it after it has occurred. It will occur right before their eyes, but they'll only see it once it has occurred. You know, you will see it, in the future. You don't see it right now, but you will see it in the future. Now, I want to pick up on that on the next recording. I want to continue through that so that I can get you into the other topics, not the other topics, but the subtopics within, because God gave me a vast amount of revelation regarding this period, but I want to give it to you in a topical form. So I'll speak, when I say in a topical form, what I'm speaking in regards to is how would I say it? I'll say it in the manner that God gave it to me. What I'm saying to you is, I have so much that God has said to me. God spoke to me on 22, a few more smaller segment pieces, but I'll just say 22 on 22 different dates, 22 different dates from the month of February to the month of current September. So February 2020, September 2020, not including some things God said to me in September and October and November of 2019, and during the time period of 2018, God spoke some things to me regarding this that I now see that that's what he was talking about. But as far as in the month of the year of 2020, up until this period of September, God spoke some things to me 22 different times, extended things. But in order for me to give that to you in a proper form, I split it up in topical subtopics. So what I did was everything that say God said to me regarding the people, there'll be one that will speak in relation to the people, in regards to the people in general. And then there are other things that God spoke to me that are in regard to, say, the Lord spoke to me in regard to the type of season this is. You really need to know what type of season this is, okay? In fact, I may begin on that one first, the type of season this is. Then the next one is the generalities of this season. Okay. The general things that you need to know regarding this season. And then I want to bring you into the specifics of this season, to the world and its systems, and then to the church, and then again to the people, and then to the United States president and the politicians. You need to hear that. The United States and its systems. You need to hear that. You have the world and its systems, and then you have the United States and its systems. God spoke to me regarding those systems, the world and its systems, and the United States specifically in this system. I will give you a peek preview right now and say this about this. You have two occurrences happening. You have the occurrence that is happening as in a sense of the pandemic, where the world is going through this shifting and this flow, this directional flow that is against what we have come to know. But then you also have the United States. We of the United States, we are in a pandemic within a pandemic. We are going to experience what the world will experience to some magnitude or degree, but no one will experience this pandemic period, this pandemic season, in the manner in which the United States will feel it. We within the United States will have a greater reckoning with this pandemic period than any other country in the world. God told me from the beginning in March, if I'm correct, or the beginning of April, but I believe it was March, and we'll get to that the United States will experience the world, he said, the world is going to experience, everyone is going to experience their share of the pandemic, but no country will experience their share of the pandemic as the United States will. He said to me, we will all have our measure of the pandemic, but the measure of the pandemic that will be experienced will not be greater in any other place in comparison to the United States. The United States is in for a rude and harsh awakening, and that awakening is upon us right now. Again, I waited to record these messages. I needed God to work in me in a way that I would be able to flow. He gave me so much that I wanted to be able to flow in an organized fashion so that I wouldn't be hopping around from topic to topic necessarily, as little as possible, and give it to you all in a form that you can follow. So I had to break it up into topical subject matters so that I can cover that subject matter and go to the next subject matter and go to the next subject matter. And again, as I say, you will begin to see just what I've begun to see, all of this unfold and take place right before your very eyes. And you will see where much of it has now occurred. But anyway, and then one other message that I have is the dream that God gave me. Now, the dream is something amazing. I have a vision. I had a vision. I had a dream. And I say a vision/dream because I was not fully asleep. I had awakened. It was morning time, and I laid in the bed, and I was drifting, and I'm just laying there, and I saw something that shook me to my core. And I will explain that. So I have the vision/dream that'll be mentioned. You want to hear that as well. I'll make this in such a way that if after like the first 4 recordings, you skip around, and listen to it based upon the topic or who it's referring to, what that particular recording is referring to, you won't necessarily mess up by doing that. Why? Because the way that it's designed, you will be able to do that and still not necessarily miss a whole lot. If you want to say, well, I want to hear what he has to say about the United States, or I want to hear what he has to say about the world, or I want to hear what he has to say about the things that we must do in order to fare well in this season. I want to hear what he has to say. You can skip around like that after like 1, 2, 3, and 4, the introduction, and then the two that follow the introduction, and then the number 4, which is what I'm doing right now. You will be able to, I think this is number 4. This might be number 3. This may be number 3 here. And then the number 4 will be the next one. After you finish 1, 2, 3, and 4, or the intro 2, 3, and 4, then you will be able to skip around if you desire. But you don't have to, because if you follow it in the pattern that I'm showing you, you will get even more out of it, because it's the way that I laid it out. I tried to make it easier for those who need to hear. Again, I've gone over further than what I desired to, but understand there is so much meatiness in this here. And we have never been in a season, humanity has never been in a season where we are right now. And if I do go over on these recordings on my desired time, which is 1 hour, please understand that you are in unprecedented times. You are experiencing unprecedented events. Therefore, you almost must expect to not be able to confine knowledge based upon time, based upon a clock necessarily. The importance is not the time period that it's taken for me to do this, as much as the importance is upon me doing this and me doing it successfully, and then you hearing it and you hearing it through, regardless of how much time and discipline it takes for you to do so. Okay, I'll see you on the next one.